Okay, we're meeting a very interesting guest today, and this is Charlotte Littlewood. And Charlotte is a research fellow at Henry Jackson Society, and she's also an expert at Prevent, that is the UK government's program to combat extremism. So Charlotte has done a lot of very interesting research in UK schools, and I'm going to, I'm not going to take too much time away from her because she's just coming out with a very interesting report about Hinduphobia or anti-Hindu hate being spread in schools in the UK. So, Charlotte, tell us about your paper.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. Yes, so we have been looking into what is anti-Hindu hate and how is it manifesting in the UK. So on the back of the unrest that we saw in Leicester last year, September last year, there was significant civil unrest between Hindu and Muslim communities in Leicester. We really looked into that. We interviewed members of the Muslim community and the Hindu community. We looked at police reports and video evidence, and we found that there had been a false narrative created, that there was hindutva terrorism or organized hindutva extremist groups agitating against the Muslim community and creating problems in Leicester. But in fact, actually, that wasn't true, and that false narrative had brought the danger against the Hindu community wide, and there'd been attacks on properties and cars and an attempted attack on a Hindu temple. So that really inspired a number of researchers in the UK to start thinking about what is anti-Hindu hate, and what are the Hindu communities here in the UK facing with regard to prejudice. There is little to no research in this regard, and we thought we would start with. We started with a freedom of information request that went out to all of the schools in the UK. And then we narrowed it down to schools that had a number of Hindu pupils. And within that, we asked whether they had recorded any anti-Hindu hate in the last 5 years.
How did you define anti-Hindu hate? Is there something specific you asked?
So we've gone through quite a large section in the report that looks at the different definitions and approaches when we're underpinning how we understand it for the sake of the report. But when we were asking the schools, we asked them with a series of examples to help them understand. So anything that would range from teasing around Hindu practices, clothing, eating habits, through to certain anti-Hindu slurs that I really want to repeat. So we gave examples so that schools know what they would really be looking for. But really, what the schools had to do was the schools had to look at their records on bullying and see if they tagged anything with Hindu. And what we found was less than 1% of the schools had recorded anything at all, whereas 51% of the Hindu parents, and we surveyed just shy of 1,000, so really statistically significant number of Hindu parents here in the UK, 51% described that their child had experienced some form of anti-Hindu hate in the same way that we had posited it to the schools. So this really shows a huge disparity between how the schools are understanding and recording this issue and how parents are experiencing that in the family home through their children. And we believe that actually the numbers would be a lot higher because not every child is going to be telling their parent what they're experiencing in school.
You're right. And if this is a cause for concern, so does this mean there is a lot of anti-Hindu hate in UK schools, which is not being, recorded in the sense, do the teachers even understand what this is about? Like,
So
what is the next step?
interestingly, only 15% of the parents surveyed had any confidence that the schools would be able to adequately tackle the problem. And what we found really interesting was we looked at a section in the survey. We asked about the teaching of Hinduism in schools. And we looked at some other studies that have been done on this as well. And there seems to now be a body of evidence building that Hinduism is really being poorly taught in UK schools. So we're having issues where teachers are relating Hinduism to the caste system, where teachers are talking about Hinduism as theistic and leading with a discussion of the gods rather than a discussion of spirituality and a whole kind of different way of looking at faith than from the Abrahamic faiths. So essentially, it's being taught through what I had considered to be an Abrahamic faith lens. And this is leading to bullying in the classroom directly. And we have that from those that we've surveyed, that children will be having a lesson on Hinduism and then they will be bullied in the classroom afterwards. So this is a real concern for us, how we're approaching teaching this subject, to the expertise around this subject. A study found that over 70% of RE teachers actually don't have even a GCSE in religious education. So the level of expertise in this area is really poor.
Wow. That's quite something. I think this is, like you said, this is research that nobody's really dared to get into so far. And it's amazing that you're saying that teaching of Hinduism is also teaching about caste. We've had this debate has been going on for quite a bit. There's an ordinance in one of the states for where they talk about casteism and in the US. And there have been a lot of very strange narratives around caste in America, which are doing the rounds. Have you managed to measure if there's any casteism or caste-related hate in schools in the UK?
Not to my knowledge. And when it comes to teaching religion in schools, the approach is very much to prioritize creating cohesion and tolerance between our diverse communities here in the UK. So the approach to teaching on all of the faiths, especially up to GCSE level and including GCSE level, is quite positive. It doesn't take an overly critical approach. Until we get to A level, then you start critiquing some of the theological approaches in and across all faiths and engaging in debates and analysis. But before that, it's a very positive discussion around faith and belief and a way to build bridges. So for caste and negative aspects like this to be brought up in a primary school setting is just hugely inappropriate and not the same approach afforded to any of the other religions.
So, who decides what has to be taught in these schools? Because in India, the situation is pretty different. We have different boards, and the governments regulate this. Could you tell us how it works in the UK?
Yeah, so that's something that we're really pushing through our recommendations, because at the moment it's set on a local level. So we have local SACREs, which are local sort of council boards that with different faith leaders on them that set how the curriculum is going to look and how the religious education is going to be taught. So we're asking for a national entitlement, that there is a national requirement, A, to teach it and to teach all the different faiths, and B, that the way in which they're taught is consistent across the UK, and that the quality is tested and regularly tested, for that it is adhering to a standard that those of the faith would be happy with. And I think that's the most important, that we have Hindu educational specialists going and being a part of assessing whether that is being taught in the schools is meeting that standard.
But yes, so this is a recommendation that you are going to be making. That's good to hear. Now, what is the reason for this anti-Hindu hate I'm sure you've spoken to parents, you've spoken to teachers, perhaps some of the kids themselves. What do you see as the reason for this?
I think it's multifaceted. So when we look at the results of the study, we find that the issue that's creating the most prejudice against the Hindu pupils in school is discussion around polytheism. And this is coming from sort of two aspects. So I think it's where a disrespect to the non-Abrahamic faith is meeting from both Abrahamic faiths. So both the Christian pupils and the Muslim pupils in the classroom, and even the teachers from an Abrahamic faith background, have a subconscious bias at the least through to an active bias. So we saw the term that was repeated the most was polytheism, plus 100 times that came up. So I think that is probably key, is that Hinduism in general is not afforded the same respect. Then there are community issues that are being driven by issues that are taking place in the subcontinent that are coming over into the UK and affecting our cohesion in the UK. So that is being replicated in the classroom. We have heard slurs that are very specific to the subcontinent, that are very unfamiliar, that teachers are not picking up and are not understanding. And we have issues. There's a whole category in the report where pupils are being held accountable for political situations in India, or being held accountable for the caste system, being held accountable for issues perceived to be negative in India. So this is really leaking into the classroom too. So it's a mixture of the Abrahamic approach to Hinduism and the rising tension in the subcontinent.
Wow, so we're exporting our biases and prejudices, it looks like. Well, that's really sad, though, it's an unfortunate reality that we're going to have to deal with. Now, what are the other recommendations that you are going to be making? You already mentioned that you're going to ask for, a relook, or rather a streamlining of the theological courses.
Yeah, definitely. There's a large emphasis on the education side of things. But also we're going to be looking at a renewal of our bullying policy. So at the moment, it is mandatory to have a bullying policy, and it's mandatory to record instances of bullying in the school. But it's not mandatory to record the types of bullying or the ideologies driving that bullying. So we have no way of knowing what kind of hate and intolerance is really affecting the young people. And because we have an increasingly diverse and multicultural Britain, it's really important we understand what hate and where it's coming from at a young age, so that we can tackle it there at school, where we have everyone meeting together in a neutral space, and try and ensure things like Leicester aren't happening again in the future. So a large sort of significant area of our recommendation is on a bullying policy that asks schools to record the types of bullying that is happening in the classroom, also to annually report that up to the Department for Education so it can be analysed. Those schools can then be given support, programs, interventions, and we can also just know what challenges we're having with our youth, and that can help us predict what challenges we're going to see on the streets.
Fantastic. And how much of this is, how much of these youngsters are exposed to different kinds of social media or messaging platforms? Does this make interventions more difficult?
So we didn't look at that in this report, but absolutely what the young people are engaging with on social media is a huge challenge for teachers. And I think that what they can do in the classroom is there's only so much. However, what they can do in the classroom is all that we have an awful lot of control to do, right? The way in which we reach the young people, this is an obvious access point. Social media adds complexity, and schools need to be working on critical thinking and critical engagement with the internet. That needs to be a part of curriculum, part of sort of how you are taught to live essentially now in the developing world of social media, and Andrew Tate being my most recent person of interest. But yes, I think that's a challenge for teachers. It's not necessarily a challenge we've tackled in this report, but most definitely it poses a threat.
Okay, my final question to you. Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister of Britain, and he's a Hindu himself, a practicing Hindu, I believe. So is that going to make a difference in perception in terms of, Hindus as a religion, Hinduism as a religion?
So we really hoped so. So the Leicester report that came out last year, I really hoped that would gain more traction than it did because of Rishi Sunak. I was disappointed that the discussion about what happened in Leicester was avoided. And I do understand he wants to be known as the Prime Minister, not as the Hindu Prime Minister. However, this is a significant issue impacting a very large successful minority within the UK. That's very important. And I do think there's an extent to which I'm concerned that he may actively avoid commenting to not look like this is an over emphatic part of who he is as prime minister, and that is a concern of mine. It really has empowered and encouraged the Hindu community, but at the same time, I hope to hear more from Rishi Sunak on an issue that is facing our Hindu community.
Well, very fair point that you made here. I mean, let's hope he does not overcompensate and not to it. But thank you very much for your work, Charlotte. And I mean, we're sitting in different continents, but there is a bond between the two continents, historic bond.
Yeah, I think that's really important. You know, I think it's really important that we work together between the UK and India, and that we understand our diaspora and also understand our relationship with India. And I think that's what's at threat here of being lost, because just to give you a flavor of what we're seeing in the classroom, we were seeing a young girl had beef thrown at her. We've had 8 physical assaults. We had one boy change school 3 times in East London and eventually have to end up at a Hindu majority school because of the level of bullying they were facing. We had multiple instances of the bullying will stop when you convert to Islam, but then also far right approaches as well, where there is bullying about curry and the color of the Hindu people's skin. So, you know, Hindu peoples are getting this from all sides, and we've done so little to deal with that issue. So it's important not only for our diaspora here in the UK, but it's important for our relationship with India that we are active about our multicultural, safe, cohesive Britain.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thanks to you and your team for the work that you have done. And we hope that all of your recommendations will be taken seriously and implemented. Many, many thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Sonia.